Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is your tropical update for November 7th. We're currently watching subtropical storm Nicole, which will bring all hazards up to hurricane force winds and major storm surge throughout all of the Florida peninsula, as well as Invest 97L, which is losing time to form. We will spend very little time talking about 97L. As you can see here is the current map 97L, much bigger than it is on that zoomed in image. The envelope of convection and rotation with it is so large it actually extends out to where 97L is at. Then 97L really not expected to develop much anymore because of Nicole's impact on it, and we'll kind of see what happens here with time. As we can see here on the impact map, significant impacts up to high risk possible. I haven't highlighted the high risk down on the bottom yet because technically we haven't reached like the threshold to upgrade to high risk, but I think we will here soon. And so mainly due to that storm surge, and so that's why I've upgraded it on the color version of the map, but not down there at the bottom on the key. So yeah, moderate risk for much of Atlantic Florida, as well as for the Bahamas, where hurricane force winds are possible, as well as I mentioned, large storm surge. We'll talk about that here in a second. Slight risk as well for many locations within the Florida Peninsula, if not at least a low risk due to rainfall at the very least. That rainfall will be an ongoing concern with Nicole's zigzag pattern, as I've mentioned the last several videos. Real quickly, let's take a look at Invest 97L. Sorry if the video of my face was not working for the past minute or so. Anyways, 97L, 60% chance of the development. That pressure has increased significantly since yesterday, and that's probably all we're going to have to say about 97L. And so let's move on to Nicole. As I mentioned, remember, this envelope of convection is much bigger than what you see here on the screen. It has that well-defined center, has a little bit of convection around it, but the main convection is actually far away from it. And this is kind of typical of subtropical cyclones. Low pressure with a low wind speed, which is kind of unusual. Again, an aspect of subtropical cyclones. And so as it attains tropical characteristics, it will consolidate a little bit, which will be good. But if it doesn't consolidate, it won't become a tropical cyclone. It will remain a tropical storm, but that means impacts extend far away from the center. And so really everybody in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, the Northern Bahamas need to be watching this storm very carefully. Tropical storm watch in effect from mouth of Omaha Sound down to the Volusia-Brevard County line, as well as in South Florida from Hallandale Beach to Ocean Reef. A hurricane watch is in effect for the northwestern Bahamas, Lake Okeechobee, in eastern Florida from the Volusia-Brevard County line down to Hallandale. And again, a storm surge watch is in effect from Omaha Sound down to Hallandale Beach. That's basically the entire Atlantic coast of Florida, where 3 to 5 feet of storm surge is likely. As we head further to the south, that is south of the impact center, where the center, the core, makes landfall at. South of the center on the Atlantic side is good for storm surge. If you're south of the center, you have less storm surge on the Atlantic side. On the Gulf side, it doesn't really matter because it's going to kind of do a 180, so everybody kind of gets storm surge on that side. 2 to 4 feet south of the center on the Atlantic side, 1 to 2 feet even further south of that area. Again, winds up to Category 1 or 2 are possible, and again, flooding will be a concern. We'll see how high those numbers go here shortly as we get more data on the storm. Only one plane in the storm so far, which identified it with having its low-level center, and the convection associated with it. Winds at 45 miles an hour at the moment, and you can see those watches and warnings begin to light up along the coast of the United States there, and we will expect those warnings and watches to continue to grow over the southeastern United States and as well as portions of the Gulf Coast of Florida. Flooding rain will be a concern, and is always a big concern with storms like these. Remember, rainwater is the #1 killer. So flooding, rain, and storm surge are really the big concerns. As we can see here, 6 to 10 inches possible along the immediate coastline. And then for much of the coast, we're expecting 4 to 6 inches. That darker green is going to be 2 to 4 inches of rain likely again for much of the Florida Peninsula. We are expecting moderate flooding rain according to the Southern Region headquarters. Also of concern is going to be storm surge, as we can see here, up to 3 feet all the way from Georgia down to around Miami area, and past that, even still, storm surge is going to be possible. As I mentioned, expect this to continue to grow both north into South Carolina and North Carolina, as well as on the Gulf side of Florida. So again, expect multiple states, multiple sides, both the Gulf and Atlantic side, to get watches and warnings with this, mainly as we can see here from wind, tropical storm force winds expected for the entirety of the Florida Peninsula, as well as coastal Georgia, South Carolina. They expect that to continue to grow throughout much of southern Georgia, as well as southern South Carolina and coastal North Carolina as well. As we move on with time, again, those watches and warnings will grow, and we'll have a better idea from those in charge what we can expect. Tornadoes always a concern with oncoming tropical cyclones, and as we can see here, this one no different. A few tornadoes are possible. Normally, we aren't reaching the red or the pink categories here, but a few to several tornadoes are certainly possible. As we can see from the models, a Category 1 certainly not out of the question. The Hurricane Center is saying as much. The zigzag, the way exactly it happens, we'll kind of have to wait and see. Will it all the way reach over into the Gulf and then zigzag back over up the southeastern United States, or will it kind of ride its way inland over central Florida? That is like latitudinally central Florida rather than longitudinally central Florida, up through the southeastern United States. So again, the general message is Florida, southeast U.S., northern Bahamas. You guys are getting a significant amount of impacts due to the storm. And you can see from the European the same question of when exactly this thing turns north, and we'll have to see once the time comes. And we probably won't really know that until about a day away from landfall, and that's why everybody in Florida needs to be watching this very carefully, especially on the Atlantic side, where they'll bear the brunt of the storm. Again, after it makes landfall, it'll begin to weaken, which is good news, and you can see that also here on the GFS. So again, the Atlantic side really needs to be watching out for the brunt of the hurricane force impacts due to Nicole. But everybody else also needs to be preparing for hurricane-like conditions, as is typical. So again, I'll be back with more updates as time goes on. As I tend to do, especially with a U.S. landfalling tropical cyclone or subtropical cyclone, as the case may be, likely here within the next couple days. That's all for now. Chris Sixton for the Catholic Media.